Deep in a forest of bleak eventide, a little boy sat in a hollow oak to hide. Shaking and rocking, eyes unblinking, looking closer, what could he be thinking? A question pondered by a party of hunters, looking for game on which to supper, only to find this young lad in a tree, unable to hear the thing he can see. "Where's your family?" they asked him, worried, to which the boy shook his head with a flurry. His eyes were vacant, lost to the setting. Poor boy's scared out of his mind, I'm betting. The others agreed and so lifted him out of the hollow oak tree as he kicked and shouted, "Leave me, please," he screamed with a fuss, "or else it will come and eat all of us." "Don't be ridiculous," the hunters laughed, unaware of the silent and sudden cold draft. The boy was shaken as his mouth lay gaped, and their window to flee was already too late. The forest fell still, no life to be heard, for the animals knew what horror there stirred. It rose all at once, then sank once more, leaving the boy as alone as before. He cried and cried, that poor, lonely boy, used once again as a bait and a toy. Many have tried to save him who could, fed to the ravenous, deep god of the wood. There are a lot of things that I am afraid of. I'm afraid of laying down in my bed and hearing something breathing underneath me. I'm afraid of basements hiding figures just out of sight of my peripherals, the rush of adrenaline as I race the light up my stairs. And I'm always the one at scary movie night watching films between the tiny cracks between my fingers. Scary stories, spooky movies, and my own imagination are often the culprits of these fantasies. And that's just what I believe they are. Fantasies. And even though I may be up for a few extra minutes imagining something peering at me at the end of my bed, I know that it's my own imagination, a quick-fitted solution to get me to sleep. But you know what I really fear? Evolution. A fear that is ingrained into your nervous system, a fear that is hardwired to your survival. A fear of death because your ancestors died because of it. There's a lot of examples for this, like the ocean or heights. But the forest, now that's an interesting one. You see, the forest is illusionary. It's a beautiful landscape in the day, a tourist attraction, and an often associated peaceful setting. But when the sun sets, the forest encapsulates hundreds of fears into one. It drowns out your thoughts with the hum of millions of insects, tests your ability to bear the uncomfortable while the temperature drops, and suffocates you in a dark that light can barely help aid. God help you if that aid disappears.
Is that a guy?
In the United States, there are currently 335 unsolved missing persons cases in national forests. In the millions of acres of forestry within the US, it is quite easy to disappear and never be seen again. I'm sure that wherever you live, you can find a national forest within a couple hours. For me, it's only a couple minutes. If I were to take a short drive right now, I could very well disappear forever. The forest would consume my tracks, my car would be left abandoned, and for all I know, my fate could be in nature's hands. It's a terrifying thing to think about on its own, sort of a call of the void effect of just being able to disappear. Due to this extreme ease of being able to disappear, it caters to much more than just adventurers. What makes this missing person statistic even more terrifying to think about is that the majority of these cases date before the 21st century. The forests are old and hold secrets that are most likely sitting right next to our modern society, patiently waiting.
Casey was baseball mad, had the fever and
Thomas Flash Gordon was a hell of a baseball player. He set an MLB record with 54 consecutive saves, was a 3-time All-Star, and is a World Series champion. He was a phenomenal pitcher, playing for 8 teams throughout his career. Today, he's an announcer for the Boston Red Sox, and his 2 sons are playing for the Washington Nationals and the Minnesota Twins. To me, he was just a name from the MLB that I didn't pay much attention to while watching football. But to Tricia McFarland, he was her savior. In 1999, the McFarland siblings, along with their recently divorced mother, Quilla, decided to take a family hike along the Appalachian Trail. The trail itself passes through 14 states, following the ancient mountain range, crossing through fog-filled valleys, muddy paths, and extreme temperature changes. To the disjointed family, this wasn't much of a concern, as they intended to take a short afternoon hike. As they make their way into the forest, Tricia McFarland lags behind her mother and brother, arguing about the recent divorce in the family. She's 9 years old and carries a backpack with her lunch, Game Boy, and a Walkman. She decided to take a short break, straying ever so slightly off the trail. After hearing her family's voices fade, she tries to take a shortcut in the trees to catch up. She instead falls down a steep slope, putting her hundreds of feet from the trail and into being hopelessly lost. The forest surrounds her in every direction, isolating her from the world, her family, and allowing her only keepsake to be her backpack and child innocence. As night approaches, she describes it as, quote, "Shadows were too black, and when a breeze stirred the trees, the shadows changed in a disquieting way." And in the psychological test of evolutionary fear, there is but one escape for Tricia. Not a warm blanket or more food or even a shelter. It's a cassette tape, playing into a Walkman the sounds of Fenway Park, and the infamous roar of the crowd cheering for a baseball legend.
He struck him out! What an ending of the ball game! Gordon struck out the side of the night!
The book, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, is one of Stephen King's more unknown works, being buried in his over 65 novels. The story of Tricia McFarland is one that dives deep into the human characteristics of innocence, survival, and psychological anguish. It's a story that isn't as horrifically direct as a killer clown or a haunted hotel. Instead, its horror derives from its ambiance and childlike perspective. As the story progresses, we as the reader are cast into an uncomfortable position of being a kid again and feeling like we are out of control of the things around us. We are forced into a frame of psychological reasoning that only a child would know, where instead of a hopeless situation being the only horror trope pertaining to the reader, we also experience a sense of incoherent thought and paranoia that we were only able to rationalize as kids. The feeling of being hopelessly lost is something that is rare for us to experience in the modern day, especially being surrounded by technology that tells us right where we are at all times. This book is not unique in its premise of being lost, but stands out amongst its peers because of its abstract perspective. As kids, we created monsters in our heads that only we could see. Combine this with the dark corners of the forest, and horrors beyond our adult understanding can be created. As King says in his book, quote, "Better to be dead than to be lost." But as terrifying as it is hearing someone else's story, this fear is one that's captured when you are the one living the story. There isn't really a good way to describe how The Forest made me feel the first time I played it. Admittedly, I was quite late to the party, playing the game for the first time last year. But even almost a decade after its release, the game holds its charm quite well. When loading this game for the first time, there was a lot of background information that I thought I knew. I knew that it was based on the premise of a plane crash, there was some type of horror element involved, and that the physics of the game were absolutely hilarious.
Don't call me Goof.
I would eventually find out I was correct in assuming all of these things, except one tiny detail. The game isn't built off of jump scares or gory cutscenes as the basis of its horror. Instead, it's something that few games truly achieve. It relies on the game's own atmosphere it creates for its terror. When you first open The Forest, you are met with a swaying body hanging from a cave ceiling, the cave's porous wall of stone letting a blinding light seep through. And accompanying this mysterious and creepy main screen, you are met with the first piece of atmosphere this game provides. Before you see the island itself and all of its monsters, a soft piano fades into existence, a slow and drawn-out melody that tells you everything you need to know before entering the game. The forest is an illusion. One of the most profound memories I have when playing this game for the first time was how much it emphasized the juxtaposition of day and night. The graphics engine was well constructed to truly contrast the two, where daytime brightens everything significantly and nighttime suffocates you in darkness. The shadows of the setting sun help foreshadow this fear of night, and subsequently the creatures themselves blend in with the towering pines that stretch overhead. As it's properly titled, everything in this game relies on the atmosphere and horror that the forest provides. As you discover more of the forest, it in turn rewards you with more pieces of the story, hiding away massive structures behind dense trees. The design of the game's map is specifically done in a way to make you feel trapped wherever you go. And when you have to rely on the forest for survival, cutting down a massive pine tree results in the forest's native inhabitants following the sound. This game mechanic starts off slow, throwing just a friendly cannibal or two in your direction, stirred by the fall of the island's foliage. But as the days pass and your walls grow higher, other terrifying creatures make their way out of the dense trees. This, on top of the natural fear of the forest, creates an experience that is truly horrifying.
Welcome to the forest. Do you know how many people go into these woods every year and never come out alive? Steve, Sharon, Charlie, Teddy thought they planned the perfect weekend out. Far away. The crowd.
If you look at pictures of the forest, there isn't really one emotion that can describe them. For instance, when I look at pictures of flowers, beauty is the first thing to come to mind. When I look at pictures of the mountains, I feel amazement at their size. But when I look at pictures of the forest, it feels like I have a different emotion every time. It would be easy to say, oh, I'm scared of pictures of the forest, but it really isn't that easy. Sometimes these photos make me feel lonely, curious, or even in disbelief. Good and bad emotions intertwine themselves just as much as the leaves and creatures do of these forests. Both Stephen King and the creators of The Forest captured this emotional yin and yang quite well. But there's an overarching description of forests that doesn't appear on the surface. It isn't as obvious as, when it gets dark, it gets scary, or when the wind blows through the trees, they sound pretty. Instead, it's something you wouldn't think would cause terror until you're in the middle of it. Forests are monotonous. Quote, "The woods which enclosed the overgrown meadow revolved before her sight the way things did when you were on a merry-go-round at Revere Beach or Old Orchard. They looked no different from the miles of woods she'd already been through, and which way? Which way was the right way?" This is just one amongst thousands of descriptions Stephen King provides of the forest along the Appalachian Trail. As Trisha painstakingly makes her way through the forest, she carries the reader along with her. Her thoughts of trees blending into one another, not being able to tell where she's been nor where she's going, creates a perpetual panic that always lingers in the back of the reader's mind. Similar to how the ocean shows its age through its depth, the forest shows its age through its height. The more dense and repetitive the forest becomes, its age starts to reach long before any of us were around. Quote, "She came to an old forest of pines through which the light slanted in ancient dusty beams like sun rays falling through the high windows of a cathedral. This might have been on Thursday." This monotony of the forest creates unexplainable phenomena and stories alike. Take for instance the Devil's Tramping Ground in Bear Creek, North Carolina. Deep in the forest lies a black spot that has no foliage growing near it, gouging an unusual clearing in the trees. Legend says that the devil himself uses the clearing around the hole to think of different evils to bring into the world. The Black Forest in Germany blocks out the countryside with pine trees so dense that barely any light can pass through. The forest itself inspired the story of Hansel and Gretel, a classic fairy tale of what lies deep in the woods when one gets lost. These stories, locations, and ideas all play off of the monotonous relationship the forest has with its victims, and the secrets just beyond its clearing. One of the strangest things that has made its way into defining the forest is ironically not something to do with the forest at all. If you make your way to the very center of the map, you'll stumble across a massive sinkhole, extending a couple hundred feet down. When I was first playing through the game myself, it was such a strange thing to find. For the majority of the game, the only two landmarks I had seen were the trees and abandoned campsites up to this point. And then, as if the ground opened up right in front of me, I almost stumbled to my death into a sinkhole that doesn't even make sense to be here. The island itself doesn't make too much sense geographically, hosting beaches, ponds, rivers, pine trees, massive caves, and a towering mountain to oversee all of it. When you're wandering through the forest from the plain wreckage where you start, you stumble across these locations completely at random. Even after sinking a couple days worth of playtime, I still can't seem to understand the layout of the island without an overhead map. I'm not necessarily directionally challenged. I'd like to think that it is quite hard for me to actually get lost. I can still tell my cardinal directions inside of buildings, and for the most part haven't gotten lost in games hardly ever. But as I said before, the forest is an illusion. It looks fine from the outside looking in, just a bunch of trees and foliage. But when you take your first steps into the edge of the woods, and the sky disappears from the trees' extending limbs, it psychologically forces you into just wandering. Sometimes it'll make you wander forever. But as much as I fear the woods, there is something that I am much more afraid of. Deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, a couple makes their way down Interstate 40. It's the middle of the night, and the Tennessee air pushes against their car as they press on to their destination in Virginia. For a while now, they've only caught a couple headlights beaming back at them as they twist their way through the black valleys. As the trees tower into the sky around their vehicle, something huge lunges out into the road. At first, it's thought to be a horse, possibly escaping from a ranch somewhere in the area. Quote, but its mouth, teeth, and face were very canine, upper body thick, lower body thin, like a dog. It was a tall or slightly taller than our car. We both talk about the sighting from time to time. The forest is a strange place, a living entity that is often older than the towns it borders, laying claim to entire ecosystems. But what lies beneath its borders are creatures of folklore that I wholeheartedly believe to be real. Quote, by means of it, it goes on all fours, end quote, is what the Navajo named the famous creature that has dominated the internet for the last couple years. Skinwalkers are nothing new, with stories being told in Native American culture long before anybody else inhabited the continent.
It's just dark as hell in here. I'm probably gonna turn around soon. Oh, there's two ways. Holy crap, dude, this trail goes on forever. It just got really quiet really fast.
Hunters recall screams they heard in the dead of night, shape-shifting creatures outlining themselves amongst the horizon line. Parents recall their children being targeted outside of their homes near the edge of forests. Others say they whistled in the forest, and something whistled back.
And it was standing, we think, right in this where I'm standing right now, and my friend's inside right now, but I'm getting this footage. And did you just fucking hear that?
2 months ago, I found myself in the middle of the forest. It was planned. I was walking from my lake house with my girlfriend down to the lake where the rest of my family was staying. The early evening sun was so hot it felt like it was burning a hole in the atmosphere as the trees towered above us. The forest was dense and everything was oddly quiet. We didn't think much of it. The entire trip, I had Careless Whisper stuck in my head on repeat, and thus I was whistling the main melody over and over again. As I whistle the first couple notes, my girlfriend starts a conversation with me, and I cut off my annoyingly repetitive melody. And as we start conversing, there's a whistle that felt like it was right next to us, completing the melody for me. We both looked at each other for a second before quickly spinning our heads around the area. Not a single person was near us, nor could be heard, and the silence was suffocating. There's no amount of logistical thinking I can do to keep me from being terrified of these creatures. There's still so much forest yet to be explored, with some of the darkest places on Earth covered in the woods, being hidden from our society for hundreds of years. I find it no different than giant squid lurking deep in the ocean, something that was once thought of a folktale becoming a reality. There very well could be creatures out there, preying on the ecosystem of the forest that patiently lie in wait for someone to wander off the trail. I'm just going to be real with you all for a second. Through the creation of this video essay, I've started to realize more and more that the forest really isn't that scary. During the day, the likelihood that there is actually something out there is quite slim, and many creatures are honestly quite afraid of humans. Most of the problems I have mentioned in this essay stem from being lost in some sort, and to be lost for a long amount of time is actually quite difficult in our modern society. Besides, the forest is absolutely beautiful and, if anything, provides more peace and comfort than fear and anxiety. When I go for a hike, I'm not thinking about the fear of being lost, nor even being there at night. All of my hikes take place during the day and are quite simple. And if by some miraculous chance I'm in the woods at night, that's when you get to see the beauty of the stars that lie above. Maybe if you're lucky, the soft moonlight cascading over the leaves will provide an extra sense of peace with the sounds of the forest. I'm at a young age and I feel pretty confident in my abilities to handle a simple walk in the woods. I don't really have that many reasons to be afraid. Like I said, I'm not a very directionally challenged person. You know, this essay is kind of a waste of time. I mean, you've made it through the entire thing, and I've decided to put my rebuttal at the very end, basically undermining everything I've said up to this point. So yeah, the forest isn't really that.
When you were stranded out in the wilderness, it was for 8 days, correct?
Yeah, it was for 8 days. I set some type of world record. It was under those freezing conditions at those temperatures. I survived minus 20 to minus 30 degree wind chill factors, and the longest somebody had survived was three days. I had survived 8 days and dropped 40 pounds. It became 86 degrees with the body core temperature, and it was after the second night that my feet were just yellow-purple swollen. I'd ripped the frozen socks off my feet and ripped the skin off of them that I knew that they were gone, but yet they still had to take me out of there, and it wasn't until 5 days later that I would be rescued and pulled off. I was titled the Miracle Man by the National Guard, who had found me because I had survived for so long.
The forest doesn't really seem all too dangerous as a thought. Similar to the cold or a storm, it really isn't that bad to think about. It's just a static fear that doesn't seem to shift much in perception, thus it should be easy to prepare for. For the cold, wear warm clothes and know how to start a fire. For a bad storm, seek shelter and look ahead at how the weather might be that day. Similar to the forests, there is also illusionary fears where they don't seem too hard to counter up front, only becoming issues when things go wrong. Unfortunately, unlike cold or bad weather, forests don't just utilize one aspect of nature to try and kill you. Usually, they end up using everything they can throw at you. And it doesn't take much. According to a study conducted by the National Parks Committee of the Great Smoky Mountains, 41% of day hikers claimed the reason they got lost was because of wandering off trail, with the next leading reason being bad weather at 17%. Quote, "If you're lost off trail, you're most likely going to have to spend the night. Search and rescue teams don't want to create an incident within an incident by sending their team members on an off-trail search at dark or near dark." It's terrifying to think that sometimes it doesn't take a series of mistakes, but just one for events to spiral out of control. A fall off the trail, shortcut through the trees, or something forcing you off the path is all it takes to put you into a deadly experience. Take for instance Eric Lamarck, a former professional hockey player who decided to take a ski trip with friends to one of the most popular ski resorts in California, Mammoth Mountain. As a storm approached the mountain, he decided to try and get one last run-in before the resort closed. Quote, "It's just Mammoth. I know it like the back of my hand. I don't have to listen to the ski patrol. I'm a professional snowboarder, and I'm not going to be inconvenienced." Lamarck would end up skiing slightly off path, led into the woods accidentally by the poor vision the storm was creating around him. He had barely anything with him, and his tracks in the snow were immediately covered by the windy conditions. 7 days later, he would be found in close proximity to Mammoth Mountain Ski Resort. In order to survive the freezing cold woods, he ate pieces of his own flesh and kept moving to avoid hypothermia. Both of his legs would end up being amputated from frostbite, and he escaped death by only a couple hours. The woods are unforgiving and often relentless, suffocating you in dark and then commonly adding freezing temperatures on top. From this story, the biggest motif that stands out to me isn't the cold, blind arrogance or unluckiness. It's the effortless disorientation the woods created for Lamarck. He was on site of a ski resort that gets upward of 1 million skiers a year, and almost died because nobody could find him, nor could he find anybody else, for over 7 days. And it isn't like this is an uncommon occurrence either. According to former police detective and author of the Missing 411 series, David Paulides, he expresses that he researches several hundreds of new missing person cases every year that occur in national parks. Many of these disappearances end up leaving no trace behind and often occur in what he likes to call cluster zones throughout the United States. These zones are common areas where people go missing, examples being Yosemite National Park and Crater Lake. And the longer you look at this map, the easier it is to see that the more dense the forests get, this is where the most disappearances occur. In 2021, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon would be picked up by the production company Village Roadshow Pictures and set to begin filming in early 2022. As of now, no news has come out besides its director being announced, Lynn Ramsey. It seems that no Stephen King book is safe to stay just as words on a page, and this story will join over 60 other films based off of his horrific tales. I'm keeping an open mind about it. Hopefully the film can capture the descriptive beauty that King uses masterfully in the book's text. It's happened time and time again. It's difficult to take magic from one medium and transfer it to another. On February 23rd, the highly anticipated sequel to The Forest, properly named Sons of the Forest, would be released to mixed reviews. The big companies would rate it extremely well, but the audience ratings would be a lot more mixed. I remember how excited I was to play this game, especially after the horrific experiences I had with its predecessor. Now, I won't say I was disappointed, but what I will say was that there was a massive tone shift with the second game. The opening screen is accompanied by intense battle music, a major change from the first game's ghostly piano melody. But putting that aside, the game felt like it was more focused on the monsters rather than being focused on the atmosphere of the forest. It's interesting how even with a more powerful graphics engine and larger environments to get lost in, the game got sucked into its own ideas. This game isn't about the forest, nor is it really about the Sons of the Forest either. It's about exploration? Looting? Falling through the map?
What the fuck? Help!
The forest works in mysterious ways. The call of the void lures us visitors in, the intrusive thought of what would happen always making its way into our heads, pairing with the sense of the forest like a poison with a meal. And with this perspective, entertainment does its best to recreate its ambiguous horror. Stephen King uses Trisha McFarland in massive blocks of text to make us feel the ambiance of the forest. The game, The Forest, creates a dense atmosphere literally, showing us the things it can hide in plain sight. Folk tales and legends do their best to persuade us not to wander into the forest alone, and certainly not to mention Skinwalker out loud. But through stories, video games, and words, there's only so much these can do to capture the spiritualistic presence of the forest, the evolution of the forest, the unnerve of the forest, the secrets of the forest, the gods of the forest, the fear of forests. Thank you all so much for watching. A special thank you goes out to my supporters on Ko-fi for allowing me to keep chasing after my dream. Their names are on screen now, and if you would like to join them and be featured at the end of every video, you can find a link in the description. Along with that, you can find links to my sources and the wonderful music featured in the video. Without all of these people, these videos wouldn't be possible. Thanks again, and happy Halloween.